Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the next stage. I'm just letting a few more of you in. We've got such a nice group tonight. And I'm going to take my spotlight off because I am not the star. So many of you are new to us tonight. Many of you are not new. Apologies if you hear a toddler screaming in the background. He does not want to go to bed. We're working on that. My name is Rebecca Wallace. I'm the marketing director here at City Lights Theater Company, and I also run our weekly streaming and video series, The Next Stage. I'm broadcasting from my mother-in-law's house tonight, traveling around during the pandemic, so things are a little different. But I am so excited to be here. So excited to be here with Doug. For those of you who don't know him, he is an absolute South Bay theater superstar. He is a director, an actor, a playwright. He's also an educator who has taught at synagogues and JCCs for 20 years. He is, hi, John. I see, John, I've not seen you in a long time. Hello, welcome. Doug is also a humor columnist. He is the master of puns, and he is also extremely knowledgeable about Billy Joel and Friends. So if you know him, you know he does a lot of those quotes. I'm also proud to call him a friend. I've known him for many years. I know he is a friend of many of yours as well. And many of you know him through Silicon Valley Shakespeare, where he served as executive director, and also founder and artistic director of Theatre Chevruta, which was at the JCC in Los Gatos and had a lot of amazing readings. So without further ado, you want to turn on your camera and come out from the green room, Doug? Yay! Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate this. It's great.
I know you see a lot of familiar names and faces. Hi, John. The last show that Doug and I were in together, John directed us. That was Tomfoolery. And actually, you know what? I'm just gonna pull up that photo right now.
That was it. Now Tabard.
That's right.
That's right.
Good to see both. Good to see both of you guys. I just wanted to say that. There they are. There they are.
I'm gonna flip his spot like this. So in this photo, Doug
the
and
bull.
I were
This is the bull.
Tomfoolery. Yes, the songs of
I've done like 4 times.
And Doug is the bull.
Yep.
Very
that
nice.
Is so awesome. That was so awesome. You guys were great. That was. I've done it a lot. I've done it another 3 times since then, and that was still one of the best productions ever. You and of course that was Dia Curley.
Yeah, we had a great cast.
Dan Galpin, and yeah, it was great.
Oh man. So there are a lot of you here tonight who do know Doug and have worked with him in the theater or have seen his amazing shows. We'll have an audience Q&A at the end, but if you've got a question that just can't wait, feel free to type it into the chat or raise your Zoom hand. I'm going to sort of break down the show tonight into 3 little segments here. We've got actor, director, and playwright. I've got little slideshows with some favorite photos to start off each segment. And at the end, we'll talk about Doug's next upcoming role. But we digress on this show. We don't always stick to plans. So as I said, if you've got a question that just can't wait, let me know. So let's start off with Doug Brook, the actor. I've got a slideshow with some of your favorite photos that you shared with me. And I am going to start that one off right now. lot of fun memories there.
That's
A lot of good
quite the
stuff.
wall.
And I meant to say, everybody, if you want to have your cameras on, you're welcome to. Cameras on, cameras off. It's all up to you. We're recording the show. We'll be showing it later on City Lights YouTube, so you won't miss anything. And hello to those of you watching it in the future. Doug, let's start off by talking about you as an actor. How did you get started? How did you start making theater a big important part of your life?
Well, it's funny. I didn't start out in theater as an actor. I started out doing lighting in high school, actually. But my sophomore year of high school, I went to Indian Spring School, which is near Birmingham, Alabama, which is where I'm from, and it was amazing. There was always a second trimester of senior year elective for play production. And so that's when they did all the one acts in the winter and that kind of thing. And I was doing all the lighting for all the shows at that point. I'm sitting in the library one day, and one of the directors, because there were 8 that year, comes over to me, leans over on the table and says, "So have you ever actually been on stage before?" I said, "No." And he said, "Okay, you got the part." And it ended up being a two-hander. It was a Murray Schiskell play called The Typists, which back in the 60s, it was paired with The Tiger. There was a brief time when they would do 2 one-acts at an evening, and this was one of them. It was like an 80-minute show, and it's just 2 people. It's a guy and a woman, and they have to progress. They're typists in an office together, and they have to progress on stage with like no exits. I remember I was off stage for like 60 seconds in the middle, and she was off stage maybe twice for the same brief thing, from being in our 20s all the way through our lives together, working together, whatever together, all the way through our 60s. And so this was the deep end of the pool for acting. It was definitely quite the deep dive for the first thing I did. And, then it kept on going. There were more one acts in high school. Like there was a Noel Coward play and an A. Milne play, and then doing bits in the, the musicals and the fall play and all that kind of thing. So it all started there as far as acting goes. And that, I was actually doing a lot more tech at the time and started directing and writing also. So it wasn't even the main thing at that point. And even in college, I barely acted, actually. I was at Carnegie Mellon. I did not major in theater. I minored in theater, though I think I ended up with more credits to my minor than my major when I got my undergrad degree. But I was focused on everything else. I did a lot of technical. I did a lot of history, a lot of dramaturgy, a lot of directing courses, a lot of writing. I didn't really do much acting there. I was in one act. I did there's a student theater there called Scotch and Soda, which goes back eons. Its claim to fame is that it's where Stephen Schwartz originally did his first version of Pippin, when he was in college there. And there's legend about Godspell starting there too, but I'm not as sure about that story offhand. And things like when I was there, actually, the guy running Scotch and Soda was Michael Patrick Walker, who went on to do a lot of things like he co-wrote Altar Boys, so things like that. And for the first 2 years, I did a lot there. I did that one act I was in there. I directed one, but mostly I was doing tech. And then, honestly, I focused on other things until I was out in California. And out here, I started being on stage more. So it was a very gradual progression into that aspect of things.
That's so interesting, but it makes perfect sense, especially to anyone who's worked with you as a director, because you just bring such a well-rounded approach to theater. You just are knowledgeable and understanding of all the angles and respectful of everybody working in every single role. That's really cool.
Well, I like to think of it that way, actually, because I've done over the years just about every role you can do in theater at least once. I've never conducted, I've never costumed, but I did sound design once. I've set design, lighting design, blah, blah, blah. I've played piano in numerous shows, actually, not in a pit, but like on stage. Acted, directed, stage managed, props, what I've done most everything at least once. Some things only once, because some things just I couldn't do well. But they all inform me, and so it's like, if I'm directing, I know what a prop designer needs to hear from me, or if I'm a lighting designer, I know what a director's looking for, or I know when I'm acting what a director's looking for from me. They all re-inform each other. And so over the years, I've kind of gone through these phases, not by pre-design, but it just happens where there's a set of years where I'll end up directing a bunch of shows and not being on stage much. And then it just kind of shifts over to, okay, I guess I'm being on stage for a while and not really directing much. But each time I come back to it with like this new iteration of perspective, having done the other roles, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it all feeds into each other. And I mean, people don't need to do that kind of stuff to be, you know, to have that kind of breadth to be able to do any specific function. But I've found for me that it helps, you know, it just reminds me of what the other person, theater is about audience. And so to me, in any given function you're doing in theater, the people you're collaborating with are in a way your audience, you know, also because I'm trying to think about what do they need from me to do what they need to do with me, you know, so that.
And it definitely shows. Well, when we started talking about putting together these slideshows, you singled out a few shows for each category that were particularly important to you. And I know, so was the first one, I know, so Blood Brothers was 1999 at Palo Alto Players, and Picasso was right around that time too, Picasso at the Le Panagile. And that was also Palo Alto Players, right?
Yep, it was a year later. It was like September of 2000, actually, yeah.
Well, let's start by talking about Blood Brothers a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a funny thing. I had been in a few shows. I started in 1998 doing theater in California, and I was in a couple shows up at Foothill Music Theater, which was tremendous fun. And the first one being Fiddler on the Roof, actually, the first time I'd done it. And but Blood Brothers was a special one for me for a few reasons. A, I loved the show. I grew up, I did not like musicals very much at all. At all.
Really?
I didn't get them. They were not my thing. I was like, you know, I mean, I'm 10 years old, 12 years old or whatever. And I'm like, okay, Guys and Dolls or West Side Story, they're gang members, but they're dancing and singing. You know, they're mobsters, but they're dancing. What? And I just couldn't get my brain past that. And I mean, you know, there were a few shows in high school. I was like, okay, we did a very obscure show called Tricks, which was very, very, very funny. And I would love to do in a black box someday. Or we did Forum, you know, I was like, okay, I get that to an extent. But when I saw in college a tour of Blood Brothers in the early 90s, I was mesmerized. And I was like, this is what a musical can be.
Now, what is it about? Because I've never seen Blood Brothers, and some people I'm sure haven't.
It's based on superstitions, actually, primarily. It's a British musical. It's the story. It's not exactly a happy story, actually. It's about a woman who has these two kids, two boys, and she is poor, and the father leaves, and she has to give one up. Mm-hmm. And so she gives one up to this woman who is relatively rich and can't have her own kids, and the two boys never know about each other's existence. But as fate would have it, there's this whole thing about superstition and being cursed and all that. And so the idea is that the mother is cursed. And so basically, as they got older, the boys met independently, not knowing that they were related. And they became very good friends. And then they became, they you could say betrayed each other. It's complicated. And in the end, they all died.
Oh, jeez.
Spoiler alert. So it's actually tragic in a way, but it's just so it's so moving, the show, if it's done right. And so when the opportunity came up and somebody was actually doing it, I was like, oh my God, yes. And so it's very special to me it is a very Shakespearean story. I thought that at the time, and I didn't even do much Shakespeare back then. And I was like, I just wanted to be on stage in it, anything, I didn't care. And I got cast in the ensemble. I showed up for the first rehearsal. And I was also cast as an understudy for the father, not the father who went away, the father of the you know, in the well-off family. And the first rehearsal, I show up and they say, you're promoted. The guy who was playing that part got an equity gig and now it's you. Great. You know?
Firstborn.
Yeah. And it was my first solo song in a show in California, so that meant a lot to me also. It was tremendous fun playing at the Lucy Stern because it's a great space to see a show, but it's a great space to play on that stage. That it just feels great up there. And it was just very fulfilling for me because of that. But the funny thing is, I was actually playing the father to two guys who in real life were both older than me.
The magic of theater.
Yeah. but I've always seemed older than I am, and I was still in my 20s at the time. I always remember that like halfway through the run, the director was there one day and he somehow found out, like, I don't know, in the green room at halftime or something, how old I really wasn't. And he was furious. He was like, how could you lie to me about how old you were? I thought you were in your 40s. And I'm like, you never asked. You assumed. I don't know. So yeah, but it was great fun to do that show. I mean, and at the time they told us we were one of the top selling shows that Palo Alto Players had in its, I don't know, at that point, 70-year history or whatever it was. And so it was a great first, not Fiddler, because okay, yeah, Jewish guy, you're going to be in the show. Okay, fine. But it was like my first one where I had no association to it. I didn't know anybody, and it was purely me just going in cold, but getting in, and it was great. So it was a meaningful one to me for that.
Oh, that's great. Doug, Nancy in the chat wants to know if you'll sing a little something from Blood Brothers.
Oh my God.
This is impromptu, but maybe a little something.
Well, so he has a song in Act 2, which basically he's the boss and he ends up firing a bunch of people in the ensemble. And it's a British show, so it's British. I don't think I could possibly sing it if it's not British. But he's basically giving dictation to his assistant, to his admin. They're all going to get fired. And he starts off, take a letter, Miss Jones, quote, I regret to inform you that owing to circumstances quite beyond our control. I'm getting way off key. Oh God, I lost the word. But yeah, you get the idea. And he's like, basically he ends up firing people gradually, and then he fires her in like the last verse, So it's a fun little song in the middle of all the drama in Act 2. So yeah.
Interesting. Well, I know we're not going to have time to talk about all the favorite shows, but I definitely want to ask about Picasso at the Le Panegile, because that's one of my favorites. And you did that at Palo Alto Players as well. Here's the picture from it.
Yeah, and I got to play Freddie in it. He's the owner of the Le Panegile, which is a bar in Paris. And the play is a fictionalized thing. It's by Steve Martin, which alone is a great reason. I had been on sabbatical in New York the previous year, and I just always remember that the gym I was going to, I was reading that script one day on the treadmill, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to do this play someday. And then Palo Alto did it a year later, and I was like, please. And I went in there, I was auditioning. There's a 2-page character near the end named Schmendeman, the most oddball character in this very oddball play, which is an imagined meeting between Picasso and Einstein. And that's all I was even looking to do. I was like, that part, thought it was hilarious. Somehow I ended up getting cast as Freddie, who's on stage basically the whole show. He's the owner.
Yeah, Freddie's a big part.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm allowed to tell this story. Is Ron here tonight? I'll tell the story anyway. Well, why not?
Which Ron?
Is it Ron? I've got. Yeah,
he's not.
I've got to tell it now. So the show was directed by Vicky Rizal, who for years and years and years was on staff at Theatre Works, and she was wonderful to work for. And Ron Gaspernetti at the time was actually, who a lot of City Lights people are going to know, of course, was managing director or something like that at Palo Alto Players at this time. And so I had auditioned for the thing, and they told me later that they were sitting there, and she was like, and not quite settling on me as Freddie, and still torn and all that. And I don't remember if it was just because I seemed a little too young or whatever, because I was still in my 20s at the time. And but she was like, I don't know, what if he had a beard or something? So Ron grabbed my headshot from her, took out a Sharpie, drew a beard on my headshot, gave it to her to look at, and she was like, that's him. So I grew a beard for the show, and that's theater.
And that is Ron, because he's a problem solver. He's City Lights resident scenic designer. You've seen him on the next stage before, and Ron will solve a problem just like that.
Ron's brilliant. He's wonderful. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Let's also take a minute talk about Fiddler, because Fiddler's when you and I met, because you directed me. I was in the ensemble. Yep. That was my first show in a long time with you. And so you've been in Fiddler, you've directed Fiddler, but as an actor, you played Tevye, which must have just been a bucket list role.
It's funny because I don't have a bucket list per se. I don't give it a lot of thought, but oh my God, yes, I was always dying to play Tevye. It was a great experience because I've always tried to immerse into roles, in some roles and some shows it's easier or deeper or whatever. But Tevye just was this experience for me. And and it sounds vainglorious whenever I start to talk about it, but I really got a lot out of being able to go on stage every night and for 3 hours just not even be me anymore and just immerse myself in someone. I mean, for years, I knew that guy. I knew the original stories. I knew him, And so getting to go and leave my life and be him for 3 nights every, 3 hours every night, it was this amazing experience. It was just, and I mean, I would have been happy doing that every week for the rest of my life. It was just, those girls were my daughters, at least it felt that way afterwards. I mean, in Act 2, after the Chava ballet, which always was just so emotionally, getting the notes out during it some nights were so hard because I was legitimately caught up in it. And I would be in tears when I exited every night when she's screaming behind me, "No, Papa, no," and all that, and the whole ensemble tradition, deafening everybody, and card, I go off the stage. And I mean, there were some nights where I remember there's one night near the end of the run where I dropped the card, the ASM over there, we had our routine, whatever. But I just dropped the card and I just kept going all the way to the stage wall or the theater wall at the end of the wing. And I just turned around, I leaned against it and I just collapsed against it sitting against it. And I was bawling, and I barely, got it together enough. I'm sure my eyes were like puffy going into the next scene, which is supposed to be a lot later in the morning, a long time later. It affected me so much. Just being able to immerse in there. I've never had an experience quite like that. I wish they all were like that, but he meant so much to me, because he means so much in so many ways to people, I guess, but it felt like a glove. And I got to play around with it, actually. I got to, do a few little things in there that were mostly for me, but every once in a while, someone in the audience would catch it and laugh their head off, It was, it's like, well, I'll give you one, and hopefully it's easy enough to explain. Actually, I think there's a few people on this that I see from the list that might actually get this. So early in the show, there's a scene where, it's about to be Sabbath and Golda's handling Tevye about, you got to go meet Laser Wolf after Shabbos. And, it's this whole scene. And he's like, "I'm praying," he's pretending or not. He's, praying. And she keeps on, handling. And he's like, "Yeah, no, okay, fine. Why would I want to go?" Whatever. So I'm like, well, it's about to be Shabbos. I was like, I want to throw in something instead of just mumbling. I want it to actually be authentic, even if it's just for me. And so I took something that comes in right before the Friday night service. There's actually a song called Shalom Aleichem. And Shalom Aleichem is actually the person who wrote the original Tevye stories. That was his name, or at least his nom de plume. And so I would mutter Shalom Aleichem, I was starting doing the praying and all that. And a few nights some people would laugh because, it's like, oh, a name drop, huh? We get that. That's funny. But that wasn't actually my reason. My reason was because at the beginning of the last verse of that song on Friday nights, it begins with Seichem b'shalom, which means go in peace. And so the last time she's bothering me, I'm like, Seichem b'shalom, And so I'm basically telling her to go away, but it's part of the prayer that I'm doing. It cracked me up somewhere deep in my soul every night. One time in this 5-week run, one person out there, one night, laughed their head off. Made it all worth it.
It was probably a rabbi.
And I never found out who, but did they get it? And I was like, my heart. Some little things in there. It didn't hurt the show. It didn't distract anything.
No.
But for that one person, it was there. So I was like, yeah, because it's probably something he would have done, maybe. So I was like, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That sounds very Tevye. There's a comment in the chat here from Steve Salmons who said, you were talking about the Chava ballet. Becky, our director, had the entire village turn their back on Chava. That scene was so emotional. Oh,
yeah. And I'll tell you, I didn't know that until we closed because I didn't see it because, I was down there either talking to her or out or whatever. When they told me that when the show closed, or it was around when the show closed, I first found that out. I was like, oh my God, that must have been amazing. So yeah, that whole scene, it was like, rip the heart out every night.
And this was 2013. Which theater company was that?
Yeah, it was 2013. It was West Valley Light Opera Company.
West Valley. Nice.
And yeah, it was wonderful. I mean, everybody in that show, we were a village, and it felt like that to me. I mean, I secluded myself. I'm not all like, whatever, but just because I was immersing my head into it, I didn't actually get to interact with people a lot during the show. Like at halftime, I didn't really go to the green room much or anything like that. I was just trying to stay in that place to just be him, So but even despite, that social bit not necessarily being there as much, because I was, keeping myself in that, it was our village. And I mean, of course, there was a lot of time outside of the show. But yeah, it was all very special to me, and everybody there, it all contributed to making a wonderful experience. Yeah.
Beautiful. And Anne says, I love that you call it halftime.
Did I?
Especially with all the sports memorabilia. Yep, that's our Doug.
I do that. I just always have, which is difficult for a 3-act play.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Fractions problem.
Well, to me, this is a very natural segue into our director section, because as I said, you directed me in Fiddler, and I could tell what an important musical it was to you. I could tell that you had such deep respect for the context and the history and knowledge of everything surrounding the story. And that's part of what really made me just love you right away as a director. So I'm going to segue into our director section here. I've got another slideshow. Let me just spotlight myself so y'all can see it. And here are some director highlights. It's so much good stuff in there.
Wow.
So many great shows. So how did your theater road take you to directing? Not all actors can become great directors, of course.
Well, it's funny. So back to high school, actually, that play production course, my senior year, I took it. And so I had to direct a 1-act. And there had been a tradition or whatever at the high school way before that people would actually write their own. And so I actually directed a 1-act that I wrote. And it was so my first time directing and my first time having written. It's also basically the last time that I ever directed something that I wrote. But that's where it started. And I always was very into that. And it's weird. It's like I lighting designed all the shows, like 40 shows through high school. And, you'd be sitting there during rehearsals and I'd be watching what's going on. And in a way, I learned a lot about directing just watching all the student directors or watching our faculty director, of course, and what would work, what wouldn't work, what would be effective, both in terms of being able to get something out of people and in terms of how to put a show together. And so even though I wasn't being trained as a director, just observationally, I was learning a lot by, well, not exactly doing, but observing. So I got to do that play. And then my high school actually let me come back the first 2 summers I was in college and do a summer show in their theater. I did Death Trap one year. I did Dracula one year. And I got to do the 1-act in college. I directed Richard Cory by A.R. Gurney, which is a very meaningful play to me, actually, for a lot of reasons. And then again, I didn't do much theater my final couple of years in college or first time in grad school. And the first few years I moved out here, I didn't much either. But then around 2001, opportunities start coming along. And all of a sudden, 2001 to 2005, I just directed a ton of shows. And then I took a long break, though actually during that long break around like 2009, 2010 timeframe, I directed a bunch of new works plays at City Lights, actually, as part of that program. And then started up again in 2012 with directing main stage shows, and it didn't stop until right before the pandemic started, actually. So that's been just kind of the path, but I love being able to, it's a thing from The West Wing, actually, where he says, you surround yourself with a lot of very smart people, you listen to everything they have to say, and then you call the play. And so it's like, I love the collaboration. I love the being able to bring everybody together, the different elements, and whether the actors, the staff, you name it, and just put it all together. And one of the things that fascinates me most is I know a lot of directors, don't go to the shows after opening night. Their job is done. I like to stand in the back and just watch and learn, because I want to see how the audience reacts to things. What worked, what didn't work. Why did that work one night and not the other night? Okay, the theater was 5 degrees warmer today. They're not going to laugh as much. Or, the timing was just a little bit off on that line. So that's why, it reminds me of timing, all those little kinds of things, because I'm always trying to learn, and it just intrigues me to watch an audience watching a play. And so I try to do it as often as I can. Also, just because I'm like, if I directed it, I should be craving to see it. And I would always feel like weird. It's like, okay, I'm going to miss out my chances to see it for the rest of my life if I don't see it now, So each one of them is a love child, and so I just want to make the most of the relationship while they're there,
Love that. Well said. Well said. Do you have some directors who you've worked with as an actor or a playwright that you've really admired and you've kind of said, oh, I'm going to learn from them and pull some of their qualities and things that they do?
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny because there's a Tennyson poem called Ulysses. And he says, I am a part of all that I have met, which poetically rendered means what the opposite of what it sounds. Everything that I've experienced is a part of me. And I'd like to think that I've pulled a lot from basically every director I've ever acted for. And certainly even been in other staff capacities with. I mentioned Vicky before, because Picasso, there was a lot in that play that just helped me evolve, on stage. One other that really jumps to mind, actually, is I did Tuesdays with Maury around 2007, I think it was. And it's a 2-person play. And I always like to say, I'm in this 2-person play of Tuesdays with Maury. Oh, are you playing Maury? No, I'm playing Tuesdays. But the thing is, so it's like the character is Mitch, like Mitch Albom, who wrote the book, and he does like 70% of the play, and there's scenes with Maury, of course, but he's narrating the story and acting out everything that builds up and all that and framing the whole thing. And the director of it, Brian Freeman, who's wonderful, he really took me through the ringer in a very good way. I always believe in push the envelope. I don't believe in ripping it into shreds. He pushed my envelope, and there were even a few tiny little tears on the corners, but it was perfect, and it's exactly what I needed, because it really got me to this point where I was realizing how much bigger big can be and how deeply immersed I can be, and really finding a way that I had never quite experienced in that way before, to be able to live the emotions that the character was going through, not emulate them, to actually really be that guy in that moment. And I mean, that fed into being able to do Tevye a bunch of years later also in the same way. And he brought me to that place, and it wasn't always easy for him, but I tell you, I was grateful for every minute of it. It was really a turning point for me. It's another show that left me as a wreck at the end, because oh my God, the ending of that, my heart. But it's so fulfilling. So what he did as a director, just in being able to do that and focusing more on the substance, focusing more even than, sometimes I would feel, okay, we don't have time to get into all of that. Just, do that then, or here's a line reading or whatever. But no, find the why, because it's going to evolve, and it's not just machination. It's emotion, it's motivation, it's aspiration, really focus on getting all those things to happen. And the rest of it, they'll find it in their envelope. Give them that envelope, help them find where they need to be as those people in those moments, and the rest takes care of itself to a good extent. But yeah, so that was a big thing I got from him in particular. Changed everything for me.
Well said. Well said. So some of your highlights, you're directing. I know one of them, so you've directed all kinds of shows. I said this when I was writing the description for this event. It's just intimate dramas and door slamming farces and big splashy musicals. Speaking of door slammers, Lend Me a Tenor, which I'm still so disappointed I did not see. I know you mentioned that was one of your favorites.
Yeah, it was 2004 actually. Santa Clara Players, which is this like little dodecagon. I think there's dodecs in that shape. I don't know, but building over Santa Clara at the Triton Museum. Wonderful little black box space, and it's funny because, again, like I said, I did not have as much growing up in musicals as I did in non-musicals. This is the first non-musical I got to direct in California. And it still had music in it because Lend Me a Tenor, there's opera in it. So go figure. It's Ken Ludwig, who I've had this long-standing relationship with. I've directed 4 or 5 of his shows now, and they've all been tremendous fun. It was just a great experience. It was a fun experience. We really got to mine the comedy. It sold great for them. We got extended by a week, which is fantastically fun. The interesting thing is my guy playing the tenor couldn't do the extension because I think he had to go to a family wedding in Hawaii or something like that. So I ended up filling that part myself that extended weekend. But I'd been there, so, through the rehearsals and everything. So actually I knew all the lines, So for what would have been our strike day, we actually did a run through to get me in it. So I'd actually run the show once with them, and then the next weekend we came back and we just did it. It was great fun. I mean, it is this hilarious slapstick show. And I remembered the first time I had seen it, which was back home, like during the summer in college in Birmingham. I saw this amazing professional production of it, and I was like, I got to do this someday. And the fact that I got the opportunity to was outstanding, and it was a great cast. And oh my God, yeah, doors everywhere. And one of the most fun things about that show is the curtain call for it is actually scripted to be it's about 65 seconds long, fast forward, repeat, no lines, but everybody running around, basically doing the blocking of the entire show again in 65 seconds to this very rapid opera music. And it was amazing to do. It was amazing to practice. The stage manager was controlling the thing. We actually controlled it so we do it at like 3/4 speed for the music, and whatever. And I would trick the cast because every night I'd be like, make it 5% faster on them, and they didn't know. And eventually we got it up to 100%. And after they went through it, I mean, this is really, the first time I did it, I was gasping backstage. And they were all like, you see? But they, we got up to 100%. And as soon as it was over and the last thing happened right on the last note of the music and the blackout, the first time that happened the week before we opened in rehearsal, I was like, that was 100% speed, guys. And in the blackout, everybody just cheered. Everybody's soul was just so invested in that show and making the fun for everybody. It was great. And, it's like, I like to make an audience laugh. I like it when a show can make them laugh. I love it when there's more layers if they want more layers, of course. And even that show has some layers if you want to find them. But it was a great entertainment. So it was gratifying.
Is comedy harder to direct than drama?
I've thought about that a lot over the years. And I don't know about harder. I think comedy is harder to consistently do night after night. It is like musicals. It is so dependent on timing. Drama is too, of course. But drama, this is going to be an oversimplification that I'm going to regret in the morning. But drama is about building and abating from and rebuilding intensity and tension. Comedy is very much delivery of timing, and a split second makes the difference between that was a laugh and that was, oh, you're trying to be funny there, So to that extent, it's hard. And it's funny. Lend Me a Tenor. I remember one of the actors in it his, at the time, girlfriend, I think, I don't think they were engaged yet, couldn't see the show because she was in another show that was running exactly opposite. So she came to see a run through the week before. And she was like, this is great acting, but it's kind of like a Tennessee Williams play. And I was like, wow, yeah. And it told me what was missing. Everybody was so into, what am I doing here? Why is this happening? Why am I saying this? We were really into the motivation so much that we kind of actually were doing it a little too seriously. And so we basically pulled back a little bit from letting that be as much of the overpowering focus, and remembered the fun, remembered the energy, remembered the timing, and it ended up being very funny again. So it's a very fine line sometimes. And comedy, I think, the one thing I will say is I think comedy can be harder in a small house. Because think of it this way. If you're in a Broadway theater, 800 seats, if you say something funny and 75 people laugh at it out of 800, it still sounds like a pretty sizable laugh. But if you do something in a 60-person house and the same percentage of people laugh, okay, 2 people laugh. That doesn't feel very, oh my God, and the audience laughed. So I honestly think that can affect comedy sometimes.
Interesting.
But, it's a theory.
Interesting. I like it. What's another one of your shows, directed shows, that's a highlight?
It's so funny because it's so hard to pick. I mean, I'm glad we're not saying
I know.
favorites, because favorites are impossible. But I mean, I guess I'd have to say, well, there's a couple that jump to mind. Finian's Rainbow, which was the first one when I started up again in 2012, was very meaningful to me. Title of show later on, but I can say that in a minute. So Finian's Rainbow, SBMT, South Bay Musical Theater, approached me about this in 2011, and I like the show a lot. It's a show with a little bit of a troubled history that it didn't deserve. It's a show that is this raving satire against racism. And it's from the early 1940s. It was so ahead of its time. And the show is very funny. It's also complicated. There's a lot of storylines. Beautiful music. Most people know that show from the music, like Old Devil Moon and things like that. But also a great dance show, which people don't remember. And, it was SBMT's middle show. And usually that's their riskier show. It's not the Guys and Dolls or Anything Goes or whatever. It's the more obscure one. And it had just been revived on Broadway about 2 years ago. So there you go. And they were doing it. And I always remember, it's one of my mother's favorite musicals, so it meant something to me to do it. But it was a wonderful, amazing experience. I knew almost nobody involved. It was the first of many musicals last decade, with several people I ended up collaborating with on many shows. Diane Milo, who was vocal director on that one, I've worked with many, 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 many times at varying capacities.
Amazing vocal director.
Yeah. And it was when I first met Esther Selk, who has choreographed everything I've done the past decade. We share a mind. It's an extraordinary collaboration we've always had. And it's literally one of those things where it's like we can be watching things from opposite sides of the house. We're just watching up there, and I'll see something and I'll just look over to her just to make sure she's writing something down, because I know she saw exactly what I saw, thought the exact same thing as I did, and she already got it down. We just had this shared mind. And it was amazing. And I've been very lucky to be able to work with both of them. And that was the first one, so it was very special for that. Nobody had great expectations for that show. It sold out the run. I think it was 14 seats shy of selling out the entire run. It surprised everybody because people were like, we thought this was a dusty old musical, but it's hilarious. And the dance is amazing. And of course the music also. So it just, on so many levels. And, it was really a treat for me because then I got to bookend it. I've done 5 shows at SBMT last decade, and that was the first one. The last one was right before the pandemic, was Big River, which is, of course, the Huckleberry Finn musical, another satire against racism. I'm not an agenda person at all in theater. I'm never trying to tell anybody what to think. I don't like to say what you should think. I just like to say you should think, and it's a meaningful thing. I mean, who knows, after the pandemic, maybe something will happen again. Yes, John, James Creer did play the senator in Act 2 of Finian's. It felt like a good bookend to me. And I got to confess that I enjoy a little bit, because I will say that being from Alabama and California over the years, I've taken a little bit of flack. I really enjoy that I got to do these bookend shows, both of which deal with the subject of racism, and they hit it on the nose, and they do it in very powerful ways. And I just like the poetry of that. I don't know. So both of those shows actually mean a lot to me. Finian's, it was like the first, so those were big for me.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I realized I didn't have a title of show image. I was going to pop that one up, but didn't have
well,
that one.
I'll tell you, that show was also amazing to me. It was Los Altos stage in 2017, I think it was. It's a very theater inside baseball kind of a show. It was in New York, and it was basically the four people who created the show in the show about creating the show. Very meta. Great music, lots of great jokes. Not always everybody's cup of tea, even for theater people sometimes. Tremendously fun. I had a terrific cast. Got to immerse in it. First preview night, one of the two guys who was involved in the show, unbeknownst to us, came and saw the preview. Hunter Bell was there. We found out afterwards, and we almost had a heart attack, and we got to meet him. We got to hang out. He called the other guy on his phone. It was like 1 a.m. in New York. He woke him up and he got him to talk to the cast and everything.
Wow.
It was such a meaningful show to me. I keep saying this, so it almost diminishes every time I say it, but it meant so much to me, partially just because of those people and the way everybody collaborated, but also just the piece of theater we created, because it's a fun show, but it has some very touching moments in it. Very meaningful, and it's very much about aspiration. It's very much about hopes and dreams and how we get in our own way sometimes of them. And it's also notable for me because it gave me my 5 seconds of, notice, I guess, because somehow I ended up being a finalist for the Theater Bay Area Awards that year for directing for that show, which I still attribute to an accounting error. But no, it was, it was actually, it was really funny because I was in a meeting at the time, new job, and I was getting these texts from people, and it was like, so this happened. I'm like, what? I mean, in this meeting, and it's like, oh yeah, you're a finalist. I'm like, so I completely did not expect that coming, and it was a wonderful thing. But to me, it was just, of course, a reflection of what everybody in there was doing. I mean, from the lighting design and the sound design and the set was just, it was another one of those things where I was thinking, if it were something like a little bit like that, a little like that there, and then all of a sudden here's this rendering, and I was like, are you psychic? I love it when those things happen in collaboration, and it was just one of those shows where everything came together, and it was a great collaboration across the board. A lot of fun.
Nice. You had Nick Rodriguez in that show, who was our Purago guy, and in The Heights, he was our Bernardo in West Side Story. So he's a big City Lights favorite.
Yeah, and he was fantastic. That was actually the second show I had done with him in less than a year. And that was the one where I got to know him a lot more deeply, because the other one was City of Angels, and there were like 30 people in the cast. This time I really got to know him a lot more than I got to in that other one. And it was a privilege. So yeah.
Oh, he's wonderful.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, let's move on to our other segment, which is Playwright. This is your life as a playwright, Doug Brook. Nice. Oh my goodness. So the first thing that comes to mind is, when I think about you as a writer, is that your website URL is not brookactor.com or brookdirect.com. It's brookwrite.com, which leads me to believe that maybe the writing part of this whole thing is especially significant to you.
Yeah, it's funny. I, again, starting back in high school, the only thing that I've ever aspired to consistently throughout my life, at least since that point, is playwriting. That was the one thing that just never went away. And I never made a career of it. That's, suffice to say, not easy. But it's just been the continuous thing. And some mornings I'm like, I don't give it enough time for it to be that lifelong aspiration, because a lot of the times, like, okay, but I can always write that play next year. I've got this show to direct right now. Or, I'm learning my lines for this thing. I'll write next week, which is unfortunate. And I try to, to avoid that. And at times it works out. But yeah, that's been the constant. I mean, college, my first grad degree, both were in writing, not playwriting specifically, but in writing. My day career in high tech is in tech writing. I write that Jewish humor column for the magazine Back East for Southern Jewish Life every month. I've been doing that for this is my 25th year. Wow, I got to write an anniversary column. Wow. But everything, there's writing all over the place. The writing's on the walls. I don't know. But you see, that's why it's a good thing that I write, because then I can edit and fix lines like that sometimes too. But the thing is that it's always been a constant. And the funny thing is, whether it's tech writing, whether it's theater, you mentioned before, I also teach on the side, all of these things to me are about audience. And that's what's always interested me the most. And writing is one of the big ways to convey to them in various ways, of course. And I'm realizing I should have edited that sentence too, but we'll let it go. So yeah, it was just something I was always very into, and something I still never. I'm always itching for more. Maybe because I just never get to give it enough consistent time. But yeah, it's always meant. I won't say the most to me, but it's been the most consistently meaningful aspect of it to me.
I can see that. So, what was it like? What was the first time you had one of your plays on stage and you saw it for the first time?
Well, it was that senior year of high school, and it was amazing. I mean, people laughed their heads off. It was totally a straight up comedy. It was about this teenage boy who was into this new girl in town. I guess it's a little bit like Grease, though that literally never occurred to me until right now. And his conscience shows up as this embodied person, is basically harassing him and giving him an impossible time, and it's, and he's talking, it's, the familiar trope of talking to somebody who nobody else can see or hear, that kind of thing. And it just played very well. And it was so gratifying. And I was like, okay, yeah, doing more of this. And I wrote some more in college, but none of it really ever got done or anything anywhere, a couple bits and pieces. When I got to California, right about the same time I started acting, because after 2 or 3 years working in high tech, I was like, okay, things are established enough, I can start looking at doing theater. I found out about, there's a place in Santa Cruz called Actors Theater, and they were one of the first, along with Actors Theater in Louisville, of course, to have a 10-minute play festival. And so I found out about it, and I sent them 3 scripts, just, for their annual call. And one was a 10-minute play. It was a comedy. One was a drama. And then I was like, I want to up my odds. So I took this one other play that I had. I'm like, yeah, that's a good play. Okay, fine. And I threw it in as an afterthought. A couple months later, I get home from work one day on my answering machine, because we had answering machines back then. There's this message I had to listen to 3 times because I could not believe which play they told me won. It was the afterthought. And it got produced down in Santa Cruz. It was a hit in that festival, not the hit, there were a few, but it was a hit in that festival, ran for 5 weeks. They were broadcasting that festival on local TV down there for months afterwards. It was in a regular cycle. And that was the first play I ever had that was published. The first play I had that was ever performed in New York. It was done in 2002 at Studio Row on 42nd Street. And you saw the picture in there earlier. It was a couple soap opera stars in it, and I was like, it was amazing. So that was the first big one outside of high school that really had an impact on me. And it was also a gift because the artistic director in Santa Cruz himself, he exercised privilege and directed that one himself, and he completely got it. I was spoiled for life because I was like, wow, what was on the page, that's exactly how I envisioned it. So it was kismet.
What a good feeling.
Yeah.
I got a couple of interesting questions that have popped up in the chat as we've been talking.
Yeah.
John would like to know, should writers direct their own plays? What's your thought on that?
If they want to. It's funny because anything I think is what I think for me, and even that answer changes over the decades. But different people, I mean, I know some people who will only have their plays done if they direct them. And there's nothing wrong with that in their cases. It works, it makes sense. Some will never direct their own stuff. I try to avoid it myself just because I like the idea for me of, if I wrote the play, I want to be able to watch. I want to be able to watch as the writer if I'm involved in rehearsals, and sometimes you're not. And I want that to be my only focus. If I'm directing the show, I don't want to be also thinking about, as a playwright, of tweaking this or rewriting that or whatever. I want to be focused. And that's just for me. That's my preference. I don't begrudge anybody who feels differently, of course. But also, I want that extra collaborator. I'm like, at the end of the day, if you're going to have a play published, you're going to send it to theaters around the country. I mean, I've had stuff done in North Carolina and Ohio, Tennessee, wherever. I'm not there. I'm not in the room to say, oh, no, I wanted it this way. Not that I would do that anyway. But so it's so important to focus on what's on the page and seeing and understanding and finding out through workshopping or whatever, or even seeing initial productions, what comes across to other people on the page, and I want that director so I can find that out from them, and that'll help feed if I'm doing rewrites during the process, what have you. And there's always rewrites during the process if you're involved. So that's my preference, but to each their own. So
yeah. You mentioned being involved in rehearsals or not. I mean, I guess it depends on the production, it depends on the theater company.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes just a matter of logistics. This was actually very cute. One of the plays I've written, The Case of the Serial Killer, it's another short play. It's a film noir satire. And it's actually probably been done more than any other play I've written over the years. And it's another one that actually premiered in Santa Cruz, actually. I think it's my last one that premiered in Santa Cruz. I should send them more scripts. That's the thing, actually. Half of writing is submitting or networking or whatever to get the scripts around. And it's a huge burden of time. Not a burden like a bad thing, but it's just a huge time effort. And over the last decade, I've been directing a lot and stuff, and so I haven't had the time. There is a high school in New Jersey that was going to be doing it in June, and the director was like, we want to get you in on a rehearsal in Zoom. I'm like, oh, that's great, But sometimes it's like, I had that you showed a picture from the Miles High Club, which was premiered in North Carolina in 2010. I had no involvement except I sent them the script. They sent me a check. They flew me out there so I could be at a talk back one night in the middle of the run, and it was great. So it varies logistically that way. Also, if you're developing something, especially a full-length work or whatever, there's ideally a process. There's a workshopping. There's getting a cast together, getting readers together to read it so you can hear it and make adjustments and rewrite. That's what we did with the Hood of Sherwood for Silicon Valley Shakespeare, which premiered in 2018. I started writing in late 2016. And we did a workshop of it as a one-night event in April of 2017, because, usually we would do something in April anyway, just as a one weekend fundraiser kind of a thing. And we made it that year also so that we could test out the material. And I went back and rewrote a bunch of stuff, and we ended up producing it. So there, of course, the writer is hugely involved in the process. I was not at a lot of the rehearsals. I was at some. I don't want to be overlording and be a shadow, and I certainly don't want to be, no, this is how I meant it. I was very, hands off to that extent. We would discuss things if they had questions, whatever. We also had the benefit that the assistant director in particular on that show knows me exceedingly well. And I think she used to say that I speak Doug. Not that she's happy about that, because she, anything that I would say, of course, was not funny, and she quit almost on a daily basis, because like as soon as I would say something, sometimes she would quit even before rehearsal started. So I didn't actually have to say a lot because she would know what I intended at least, and sometimes they come back and say, yeah, can we change that though? And we did, so. It varies. I'd say it's always good to be involved. It's not good to be over involved. It's also not good to be under involved. It's got to be the third bed. It's just right.
Before we move on, Lauren would like to know if you have any advice for aspiring playwrights.
Wow,
Or emerging playwrights. Sorry,
yeah.
emerging. Lauren, you already are a playwright. Emerging playwrights.
That's especially timely because actually South Bay Musical had me do a 4-session playwriting 101 series just a couple months ago. And there was a lot of stuff, but the underlying theme I ended up focusing on with them, and most of them had written something before. Some of them were pretty experienced, some of them weren't. But everybody had done at least a bit. My underlying theme was don't get in your own way. Don't stop yourself. It's like, don't negotiate against yourself. And I mean, honestly, it applies to acting or anything else. Don't stop yourself from going to the audition just because you think they won't cast you. Make them not cast you, give them the choice at least. Otherwise, they definitely won't. Don't be like, oh, I don't know how to put that down yet. Don't let that stop you. Go ahead and start putting it down. 90% of writing is rewriting anyway, we do so many things to get in our own way from just writing. So my thing was, that's my single bit of advice that has a lot of tendrils to it. Don't get in your own way.
Very good advice. Well, before we move on to the audience Q&A, and we've been asking a few questions here and there, Doug has a very exciting role coming up next. As I said before, he was executive director of Silicon Valley Shakespeare and has a lot of great relationships and connections there. And he is going to be playing, you're going to play the lead in a one-man show. I almost said you get the biggest part in the one-man show, which is Shylock. And here's a photo from it. That's a co-production of Silicon Valley Shakespeare and Tabard Theatre Company, and that is coming up. Tell us a little bit about Shylock.
Yeah, this is a fascinating play. And actually, it's also terribly ironic because, I was executive director for 6 years. I just stepped down at the end of March. And throughout my time with Shakespeare, I was always pretty adamant. I mean, for reasons, the play that I wrote ended up happening, and I directed a couple of shows like you saw Three Musketeers early on, but in general, I was like, I didn't want to be artistically doing stuff. I was focused on just running the business of the company. So go figure, 2 months after I stepped down, I'm in this show. So what by design, it just happened that way. This play is fascinating. It is such a conversation starter. I have always had an affinity for Merchant of Venice, among a couple other Shakespeare plays in particular, but I've always had an affinity for it because it's a challenging piece in a lot of ways. And this play touches on it. Basically, the premise of the play is that there's a Shakespeare festival that is doing a production of Merchant of Venice, today, now. And there's a huge local controversy about it. And so the festival ends up canceling it. The character that I'm playing is the guy who plays Shylock in that canceled production of Merchant. And so this play that we're putting on is him coming out from behind the curtain after the final performance of the canceled show and doing a talk back with the audience about it. Except he's really just doing a talk to the audience about it because it's not interactive, really. And he's basically presenting his side of the controversy because he's the focus of it, because what he did was he and the director worked out that they were going to do Merchant the way that Shakespeare originally intended it when he wrote it, which is that Shylock is a Shakespearean villain. And so he plays him as a villain, a bad guy, a negative character. And that causes all kinds of controversy, and so this whole thing raises a lot of questions about cancel culture, certainly about anti-Semitism, about intercultural relations. It touches what is art, what is censorship. It really delves into all these things, but it's also fun. It's really it's really a thinker, and it really gets a conversation started, and I think some important conversations. And again, one of the things that really resonates with me with this play is I don't do theater with an agenda. I don't want to tell anybody what they should think. I want to tell them that they should think. And that's what this play does also. And that's one of the reasons that I really am fascinated by it. And I'm really hoping people are going to like it and go see it and get something from it, because it offers a lot. And you don't have to agree with everything that is said in the play. You don't have to agree with this guy's approach to Shylock. Personally, I don't. But it's fascinating to delve into and to really think it through, because then at least we've thought through it all, and heard the other side and agreed to disagree. I mean, his approach with Shylock, he explains it so much, and I cannot dispute a single thing he says in the play, but I don't agree with him personally. So yeah, it's fascinating, and I love it, and I think it's going to really, going to fascinate people who see it.
It does sound fascinating. I put a link in the chat to SV Shakes' website. This is streamed and performed live, right? So it's multi-cameras from the Tabard Theater.
Yes.
And it's about 80 minutes long. Is that right?
Yeah. Usually I've been clocking it at 75, but with adding acting and stuff, because I tend to rush. It's probably about 80. By the time. But yeah, so I'm going to be performing it live every night. It's not going to be recorded. Yeah, it's from the Tabard stage. They have set themselves up with this studio where they've got these 3 cameras from, it's like a TV studio, frankly, but it's on their stage.
Yeah, Tabard is doing amazing things with streaming.
Yes. And so this is going to be another one of those. And yeah, I've actually been there a couple of nights already, starting to rehearse in the space, and it blows me away. I mean, I've done, like, with tomfooleries the other time I've been on stage in that building.
Yeah.
And it is so fascinating, because it's so much the same yet so different to have it set up that way. And it's interesting to be doing a play that is essentially a talkback with no audience there. It's going to be a home audience. So it's interesting. Though actually there's going to be some talkbacks after the show. So there's going to be talkbacks about the talkback. The show gets very meta. Very, very meta.
And so those will be like through Zoom, or how will the talkbacks work?
The way that they have been doing it, to my understanding, is, yeah, it'll be through Zoom, right after the show. It's still the same connection and all that. And I think what happens is they just put me in front of a laptop over here, and at least 6 feet away, they put the director over there, and we're each in our Zoom windows, and we're talking and answering stuff that comes in the chat, I think. But yeah.
Interesting. A talkback after a talkback. And when is your opening night?
June 4th, and then it runs for 3 weeks. And they're doing a nice thing with this play. I think there's going to be like a talkback after each matinee. But what they're doing is they're going to give access to the talkbacks to anybody who sees any of the performances. So if they want to come and talk back, and hear the talkback, or, talk back, that they can anyway, even if they went to like the Thursday night show or something like that. So, yeah.
Okay. So it was nice, because the casting announcement was just made just days before this program. So it was very good that we're able to let folks know about your show, and so you all know where to see Doug next. Yeah. And of course, as I said, you can also find him at brookwright.com, where he's got great photos and all kinds of stuff. Let's open this up to the audience. I see there's some questions popping up in the chat. As I said, you are welcome to turn your cameras on, raise your hands, just yell out a question, or you can type them into the chat. John is starting us off with the first question in the chat. Have you ever written a musical, Doug?
Not that's been done. I have actually worked on a few over the years. I've never quite gotten there yet. And again, mostly time has been a factor, but I have worked on a few. I have one I have a particular affinity for that I'm trying to pull out of the drawer. It's like having stood down from being on staff at Shakespeare and focusing just on my day job and on teaching on the side. I'm going to have more time. And one of the things I want to do is get back to writing more again, actually. So I'm hoping to really get that going. So yeah, I've written songs for some of those. Songwriting is actually something that I've been doing quietly, and nobody knows this forever. But in the past
secret's
year,
out.
Huh?
Yeah, secret's out now.
Yeah, I know. But no, the thing is, I've been starting to actually try to do more with that in the past few months, just to see what can happen with it. So I've written some songs over the years for some of those musicals also. So maybe in 2 or 3 years, because musicals take a long time. I mean, Hamilton took 10 years, I think, for him to get done. They take a while and a lot of development. So I'm hopeful to be able to, jump through that hoop. I've written musical parody stuff where, it's like Forbidden Broadway kinds of things, taking existing songs and changing the lyrics, but that's different. Not any lesser, believe me, that's tough stuff to do well. But yeah, I'm hopeful about that.
Nice. Anybody else have a question? And if not, that's okay, because I always have more. We are coming up at about 9:13, and we'll probably go about 10 more minutes. So if you'd like to jump in with questions, I always like to hear questions from theater artists about sort of near misses, things that are about to go wrong on stage, or things that you save at the last minute, because those stories are the best. Like Ron Gasparnetti has this great story about how a Garfield balloon somehow floated on stage during a production of, I can't remember what the show was, but I know you've got a great one about Damn Yankees with the announcer and the big, do you know which one I'm talking about?
I do, actually. I hadn't thought about that.
You got to tell the Damn Yankees story, because I've always heard it from, Ron Evans's point of view.
Yes. And he actually helped save the day on that one significantly. So back in 2001, I directed Damn Yankees over at West Valley Light Opera. It was the first major show that I directed in California, actually. And there's late in Act 2 of it, there's an actual baseball game that happens, and there's a lot of voiceover of announcer stuff, as the game is happening. And we actually got a couple people. We got Ted Kopolis, who's this, he directs a lot out here. He writes a lot. He actually used to be a radio personality out here. And we got Scott Budman, who's currently NBC Bay Area, to do the voiceovers for the broadcasters. And it was all this pre-recorded thing. One, I think it was a matinee. Something happened and the recordings didn't play. And it's like, okay, we've got baseball players on stage. We hear crowd noise. We don't hear announcers. What the what? And so I'm bolting up the stairs to get up to the booth, to find out what's going on. I see the sound person looking like, and then I bolt back downstairs. I mean, that was literally the answer I got. And I bolt back down those stairs. If you've ever been to the Saratoga Theater, that was dangerous. And bolting around backstage, because I was going to be like, somebody get on script, who's off stage and do this. Ron was actually like the one ball player on the team who wasn't on stage in that scene for whatever reason. I can't remember. I think he already scored, or he was the last batter or something. I don't remember why, but he was off stage. And so he conveniently had actually already picked up a script and was just shouting the lines from the wings. To save it. And I get into the wing and I see this is happening. And I'm like, he had the same idea as me. Thank God, Yeah. So there was that.
And then you just collapsed in the wings.
Yes, I think I seem to remember hunching over at that point and being like, yeah, so there was that. There's a legendary one that I will tell, and I know at least a couple people that I see in the list know this one. The second play I was ever involved with out here was actually at Santa Clara Players in 1998. It was after I'd done Fiddler at Foothill. It was a play called Doubles, written by that friend of mine, Ted Kopolis. And I was stage managing it. And there's a little 60-seat theater. And this play was, there were 6 scenes set in 6 different time frames. And the second one was in Rome. I want to say Greece, but I think it's Rome. Togas, whatever. So I'm supposed to bring on this small pedestal, like a mini column, with a platter of grapes on it and set it down in the scene change going into it. Okay. After opening night, one of the actresses was like, you know what? I want to actually eat a couple grapes off that plate during that scene. And so she brought real grapes instead of the wax grapes that were props that were on the thing. And so that's what was on the thing, the second performance. So I'm carrying the thing out in the blackout, put it in place. The grapes were still wet. So as I put the column down and the plate was on it, the grapes kept going. And all 3 bunches of them hit the stage floor. And in this place, the front row of the audience is at the stage floor level.
Yeah.
And the blocking, so I go backstage, because what am I going to do? And I couldn't actually really see the full impact of what happened because it was dark. So I go backstage, and Tim Reynolds was in this. And so I say to him, there's a few grapes on the floor. There was no blocking in that scene anymore. That entire scene was dialogue, as he and the actress were picking up grapes.
The grapes.
Collecting them audience members were picking them up and handing them to them because they had rolled under their feet in the front row. But the scene kept going. And so my favorite thing ever is that the scene ends, Tim comes off stage, he's like, "A few!" And the greatest thing is people love to tell this story at my expense, so I'm telling it now preemptively. And it's a 60-seat theater. I don't even think it was a full house that night, but I would not be surprised if I have heard 135 people in the South Bay over the years say that they were there that night. It's just one of those stories that I still hear about over 20 years later.
Well, I noticed that the minute you started telling the story, Barbara Reynolds typed into the chat a few graves.
Yeah. I think she was there that night. But yeah.
Oh, that's a good one. And you and I worked on Lucky Stiff, the musical that you directed, and that I was in. And I think we lost an actor every weekend.
It was.
Every time I came in, it was like, "Oh, Becky, you've got a few more lines. You're now playing the French maid in addition to the nun and the." It's
right,
just like,
right. I mean, theater lore is that, bless its heart, because it's a wonderful show, that show is cursed, and I'm not even sure why. It's basically Weekend at Bernie's the musical, and if you know Ragtime and, well, there's a bunch of musicals they wrote. This was their very first one back in the 80s, and it's loads of fun. And in the course of that, we did it up the peninsula, up in Pacifica, and in the course of that production, opening night, we had a cast of 17. 5 weeks later, closing night, we had a cast of 13. And we had gone through, I think it was either 21 or 22 actors through the process from the first rehearsal on. And I mean, a lot of this was mishaps. Like the final weekend, I remember one of the supporting leads, she had an emergency appendectomy.
yes. Yes.
Well, I think I was in New York the second weekend and got back to find out that there had been a fight between two of the women in the show backstage the previous weekend while I was away, and one of them
And
would
somebody
back.
quit.
Yeah. There was somebody else.
That's how I became the French maid.
That's right. That's right. There was somebody else who had a problem with their knee. There was all kinds of things that just happened, you know. And yeah, what did we do? We adapted. And it still went, and the show was still fun, and it still did well, you know. But yeah, I had never seen anything like that before. It was astounding, and it tells you about resilience and flexibility amongst actors. It was just astounding to witness.
You were the most flexible in any show I've ever done, and I want to thank you for that. It's been a long time, but the tomfoolery. Doug stepped into the role of tomfoolery 10 days before we opened, I think, right?
Yeah, something like that. I'll tell you. Here's the thing. So I was like, the Monday before Tech Week. So right before.
Yeah.
I get an email from you, and I'm home. It happened to be Yom Kippur, so I wouldn't have to work anyway. Except I was sick with 102 fever, so I wasn't at Yom Kippur either. And so I was home. I saw an email from you. Saying, "Hey, you know," you knew
it was my mea culpa email, because if you remember, I had messed up the opening night of 42nd Street when I did the lighting design for that, and I was very worried that I really wanted you to come and do the show. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. So the thing is, what happened was so you were like, well, yeah, I know you like, Tom Lehrer songs, so, I need somebody to jump in. Yeah, okay. I said, I'm sick. And so I came to music rehearsals, I think it was that Tuesday and Wednesday night. I was still sick as a dog. I was coughing my way through. Becky was in the show, Daya was in the show, but the other three people didn't know me. And I know that at times they were like, saying to the others, it's okay, he can actually sing. He's just really sick right now.
He's usually better than this. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. Yep.
And it ended up working out. And I don't know if you know this actually, but the funniest thing about this is I don't know if it was like 13 songs I was in all or part.
Yeah, you were in a lot of songs.
And of all of those, I actually only knew 2 of them before this. Of like, the 6 or 7 that I wasn't in, I knew like 4 or 5 of those.
Right.
So it was crappy, and it was a lot of fun. It was a whirlwind, and it was tremendous.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it really was. And you were great. I mean, the whole cast was great, but it was, I remember the reason was because the guy that had played the part before you, we found out a week before the show that he couldn't hear. he was deaf and we didn't know that. And he couldn't see any of the lines. He couldn't hear the lines. So he was missing cues and we had to let him go. And I was so sad, but you did a great job. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful to watch you in directing and acting all over the years. I've always loved it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Before
we wrap up, does anyone else have questions for Doug or compliments on any of the shows that you've seen him in or worked on? We've got a quiet crowd tonight. There are a lot of you out there, but you're quiet.
Oh, Steve just mentioned to me Curtains, which is the middle show of the 5 that I directed at South Bay Musical. It went through a plague. The whole cast through the course of that run got sick. I think there were literally 2 people out of it was like 28 people in that show or something like that who didn't actually get sick somewhere during it. They had t-shirts made. You know, I survived the Curtains plague. Funny thing is, I don't have the t-shirt. I'm still sore about that. But actually, I don't remember if I got sick, so I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I mean, it was like one night. God, I can't remember which character it was anymore, but there was a woman down in this, thing under downstage left who was actually singing for somebody on stage who lost her voice. Oh yeah, it was in the first scene of the show. I remember exactly who it was. And Mary Melnick was down there in that space being her voice for that song and lip syncing for it.
I heard
the funny thing is, you really couldn't tell that it wasn't her. They were so perfectly doing it. I actually had to go and check afterwards. I was like, did she get her voice back enough to do that? And I was like, no, it was so in sync. So yeah, resilience again. Yeah, casts do what they got to do. And that's one of the beauties of theater, because the show must go on.
And it does. And it does. Yeah. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to add, Doug?
I'm just grateful for this. I have been watching this stuff go by and seeing, and I'm like, I can't conceptualize that I even did this stuff. It's just so it's weird. It's like I had this experience, driving back from the rehearsals the last couple of nights. It's like, and everybody with the pandemic, it's like it's this surreal thing of being on stage and rehearsing something actually feels like the actual embodiment of doing something that feels like it was only ever in my imagination before that it ever happened before, And so seeing all these things is just amazing to go through, and it's very humbling, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody being here, and I appreciate everybody's enjoyment of all the things they've enjoyed, and I hope it continues. I mean, theater is a blessing; it really is, in whatever ways it moves people. So yeah, basically that.
Well said. Well said. We have a lot of nice comments coming up in the chat. Lauren says this was so cool. Thanks, Doug. Barbara says it was really fun hearing all these stories. This is a weekly series, as I said, The Next Stage, and we will be back here in the Zoom next week with Melinda Marks and Julia Halpern-Jackson from Play on Words, which is a literary performance series. And Melinda's going to be performing an original story by Melissa Flores Anderson. And we're going to learn more about Play on Words and their upcoming virtual show with the San Jose Museum of Art. And after that, we've got musicians and dancers and all kinds of stuff coming up. So, a lot of comments coming up in the chat. Miriam says, I really like Doug and Fiddler at Saratoga. At first, I kept thinking it was him because I know him, but then he was Tevye.
Oh, wow.
Well said.
Oh,
well said.
I'm so glad.
Susan says, always a joy to work with you, even with the jokes. Ha ha. Yeah, I know you restrained yourself. You didn't do a lot of puns tonight.
I tried to behave, but I'll tell you, actually, that at the first rehearsal for Finian's Rainbow, Diane Milo was vocal director, and mostly people did not know me at all. And I said something Dougish, and I said, "Sorry, guys, you'll get used to it. The jokes don't get better." And then Diane in the back, who didn't know me, said, "Just more frequent." And the place lost it. And I've been hearing that one for years also.
That's part of your charm. That's part of your charm. The other thing that I wanted to say is why I love you so much as a director is because you make everyone in the room feel valued, and everyone is welcome to speak up and give their ideas. And that's what I always like. And if it's not the right one for the show, you're very diplomatic about it. But I remember being even just like a little lowly ensemble member and kind of going up to you and saying, well, is it okay if I do this? And you're like, yeah, I think that would work. And it's not always that wonderful collaborative experience when you're in a show. So thank
Well,
you.
I've been in
Should
ensemble
be.
so many times over the years that to me, there's nothing lowly about them. So often I think it's some of the hardest stuff. I really do. Because in ways you're given the least material to work with, and you've got to find something and make something, you know. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. So I think it's I think it's invaluable.
Indeed. Well, thank you all so much for being here tonight. What a treat to just sit and talk theater and talk our favorite art form. Thank you all so much. As I said, welcome back next week and check out Doug in Shylock. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you all.
Everybody
Thanks,
have
Becky.
a great rest of the night. Thank
Thanks.
you and stay safe, everyone.
Great to see you again, Becky. Great to see you,
You
Doug.
too.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye all.